The urge to uncover the secrets of Egyptian civilization goes back far further than most of us imagine, setting a historical precedent for cultural obsession that spans millennia. Consider this remarkable historical paradox, a truth that resets our perspective on time itself. Cleopatra's reign is actually closer to our present day than it was to the construction of the Great Pyramids. That staggering temporal distance illustrates just how truly ancient Egypt is. A civilization so vast and so enduring that even within its own timeline, its greatest eras seem impossibly separated. And if we follow this long chronology of fascination, our story with this powerful North African culture begins not in the modern era, but in antiquity itself. The ancient Romans were the first Europeans to genuinely fall, body and mind, under Egypt's powerful spell. Their engagement was not accidental. It was a complex and shifting fusion of cold political calculation, imperial ambition, and a deep, almost spiritual, cultural fascination. As Rome's power expanded east, iconic figures like Julius Caesar and later his ambitious successor Mark Antony became utterly captivated by the allure of Egypt, or more precisely, by its final brilliant ruler, Cleopatra VII. She was the living embodiment of the charisma and ancient mystique of her kingdom, a woman who leveraged her nation's incredible history to defend its future. This initial entanglement, driven by love and power, only paved the way for something far larger. After Rome formally annexed Egypt in 30 BCE, following Antony and Cleopatra's defeat, the fledgling empire found itself staring into the abyss of a history far older than its own. The Romans responded by importing Egyptian symbols wholesale, a massive display of dominance through assimilation. Majestic obelisks, carved millennia ago, were meticulously shipped across the treacherous Mediterranean and forcefully re-erected in Roman public squares. Imagine the spectacle, the sheer logistical feat of moving these enormous stone pillars only to plant them at the heart of the new capital, announcing control through sheer scale. Roman coins began depicting the iconic sphinxes and pyramids, while Egyptian art was widely copied and reinterpreted, its motifs integrated into villas and public monuments. Rome wasn't just ruling Egypt, it was visually displaying Egypt, announcing its imperial control through a powerful, undeniable act of cultural appropriation that sought to claim the Nile Valley's heritage as its own. This absorption went beyond mere symbolism. It penetrated the very fabric of Roman belief. Even religion absorbed the Nile's profound influence. Roman writers eagerly described Egyptian deities, often blending them into their own established pantheon in a process known as syncretism. A striking example of this religious synthesis was the hybrid god Serapis, created as a fusion of the Egyptian deities, Osiris and Apis, and specifically designed to unify the distinct cultural identities of Egyptians and Romans under a shared state-sponsored faith. The great river itself, the very lifeblood of the land, was personified as the god Nilus, celebrated in countless statues and mosaics. Even the warrior god Horus was adopted, often depicted as a falcon-headed soldier wearing Roman armor, symbolizing the integration of Egyptian martial power into the legions. It was an intellectual and spiritual surrender to the allure of the ancient East. But the true superstar of this Roman Egyptomania was the goddess Isis. Her widespread cult traveled further and faster than any other Egyptian deity, spreading with incredible speed across the Mediterranean and deep into Europe. Unlike many Roman or Greek cults, Isis offered the promise of personal salvation and appealed to all social classes, including women and slaves, which gave her worship a uniquely democratic and fervent following. Pilgrims flocked to her great temple at Philae, and shrines dedicated to her appeared throughout the entire Greco-Roman world, from the strategic Greek island of Delos all the way to modern-day Germany and Britain. Roman artisans crafted works that were Roman in their core design, such as lamps and frescoes, but they were meticulously cloaked in Nile-inspired motifs, demonstrating the pervasive nature of this cultural blend. Egypt was simultaneously exotic, deeply spiritual, and intensely fashionable. A land to be conquered and governed, yet also a powerful culture to be respectfully borrowed from and creatively reshaped. This early, intense entanglement shows us how foreign fascination with Egypt is not a modern phenomenon at all, but a recurring impulse of history. But what would happen when the knowledge of this powerful culture was lost to Europe, only to be rediscovered centuries later? The next chapter in the story of Egyptomania began when the Renaissance period dawned in Europe. Here, the idea of Egypt dramatically resurfaced, but often indirectly, through the rediscovered or well-preserved ruins of Rome itself. Most Europeans of the 15th and 16th centuries had never set foot in Egypt. Their exposure was entirely secondhand. They encountered the very Egyptian obelisks and statues that Romans had transplanted centuries earlier, now lying scattered in fields or half-buried beneath the soil of Italy. Ironically, what these Renaissance thinkers considered to be authentic, untainted Egypt was, in fact, already a Roman reinterpretation, a copy of a copy, adding a further layer of mystery. The Renaissance elite, hungry for ancient symbols of power and permanence, eagerly wove Egyptian imagery into their own culture. Popes commissioned the impressive feat of re-erecting several massive obelisks in the heart of Rome, strategically recasting them as Christian symbols of papal supremacy, performing the same political act that Roman emperors had done centuries before to flaunt imperial power. The enigmatic hieroglyphs, still completely undeciphered and incomprehensible, were treated not as a phonetic language, but as mysterious, complex codes, arcane symbols guarding profound, secret wisdom. This misunderstanding led scholars to invent entirely fictitious writing systems they called neo-hieroglyphs, fake Egyptian-looking alphabets that were actually used to express complex European philosophical concepts. They projected their own desire for secret knowledge onto the unknowable symbols of the Nile. This intellectual environment perfectly fed into Europe's growing interest in esotericism. Alchemists and occultists became convinced that Egypt was the true origin point of hidden knowledge, a place that concealed the deepest mystical truths of the universe. The legendary Hermetic tradition, a key current of occult philosophy which claimed descent from the mythical Egyptian sage Hermes Trismegistus, was widely believed to be Egyptian in origin, giving the land an almost supernatural authority over the search for truth. Egypt ceased being understood as a real, complex nation with a living history, and was instead transformed into an imagined, static library of mystical secrets, waiting only for the right European mind to unlock its wisdom. The image subtly shifted again during the Enlightenment era. Egypt was no longer just a source of ancient mystery. It became widely revered as the cradle of law, science, and social order, the rational, original civilization from which modern society flowed. Philosophers praised Egypt as a fountainhead of rational civilization. Travelers on the Grand Tour, the traditional journey across Europe undertaken by the wealthy elite, were eager for cultural polish, and they could marvel at Egypt secondhand without ever leaving European soil. Rome's magnificent obelisks, libraries full of travelers' romantic tales, and countless Egypt-inspired artworks allowed the elites to experience the exotic aura of the Nile Valley without enduring the hazards of the actual journey. Egypt had truly become a powerful idea, a compelling myth, as much as a physical location. But a sudden and dramatic event in the late 18th century was about to strip away the romance and bring the real Egypt crashing back into the center of European power politics. The European obsession exploded into a new, decisive era in 1798 when Napoleon Bonaparte launched his ambitious military campaign in Egypt. This was not a purely military deployment. It was a grand cultural and political statement, a carefully choreographed blend of theater, calculated propaganda, and deep scholarship. France saw itself as the cultural and political heir to the Roman Empire, and Egypt, which had been a prized Roman province, was strategically ripe for claiming. While militarily, Napoleon's forces were ultimately thwarted and routed, culturally, the expedition changed Europe forever by setting the conditions for modern Egyptomania. Crucially, alongside his army, Napoleon brought more than 100 hand-picked scholars, engineers, and artists, the savants, whose mission was to scientifically and systematically document every aspect of the ancient and modern country. Their monumental survey, later published in many volumes as the majestic Description de l'Égypte, was unprecedented in its encyclopedic scope. Ancient temples, plants, animals, geology, and monumental structures were all meticulously documented, measured, and illustrated with spectacular copperplate engravings. When these volumes were published, they caused a genuine intellectual sensation across Europe. Suddenly, Egypt wasn't just a vague, esoteric myth. It was mapped, catalogued, and illustrated in stunning, tangible detail, opening the ancient world to European academic scrutiny. And then came the most crucial discovery of the campaign: the Rosetta Stone. Found by French soldiers in 1799, this seemingly unremarkable fragment of granodiorite was inscribed with a single royal decree written in 3 distinct scripts: ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic script, and ancient Greek. It was immediately recognized as an unparalleled key to the lost Egyptian language. Though it was seized by the British shortly after Napoleon's defeat and moved to London, its value proved priceless. The intellectual race to decipher it commenced. It would take decades of painstaking work, but in 1822, Jean-François Champollion finally cracked the code of the hieroglyphs, providing the first comprehensive understanding of a language unseen for a millennium. This moment marked nothing less than the birth of modern Egyptology. What began as Napoleon's failed military gamble had successfully reshaped Europe's historical imagination and laid the permanent foundations for both the popular craze of Egyptomania and the scientific discipline dedicated to its study. However, this fascination immediately took a darker, distinctly political turn. Egyptomania wasn't just academic, it was deeply political. Britain and France competed fiercely for commercial influence and strategic control of the region. By 1882, Britain had gone far beyond academic curiosity and established the so-called Veiled Protectorate, taking effective control of the country. Egypt, which had begun the century as an exotic curiosity and an intellectual puzzle, was now firmly in the grip of rival European colonial powers. What had begun as a spectacular idea had tragically evolved into both a scientific discipline and a powerful colonial project. This period of colonialism and intellectual conquest coincided with the birth of modern tourism. For centuries, only the most powerful, kings, emperors, and select scholars, could journey to Egypt. But by the late 18th century, the pattern began to shift. No longer limited to monarchs, wealthy private individuals sponsored expeditions, often driven less by serious science than by sheer vanity and a thirst for adventure. Gentlemen archaeologists and treasure hunters scoured the ruins with enormous enthusiasm but minimal training, producing romantic, often inaccurate accounts and illustrations that thrilled European audiences back home. In the 19th century, tourism itself dramatically industrialized. The pioneering British entrepreneur Thomas Cook seized on the trend and created the world's first package holidays. His company offered comfortable, guided Nile cruises and structured itineraries that made Egypt newly accessible to the burgeoning European middle class. By the 1880s, Cook's iconic steamships virtually monopolized all tourist traffic on the Nile. What had once been the preserve of pharaohs, emperors, and dedicated scholars was now literally packaged and sold as an exotic adventure for curious Europeans with disposable income and a newly found desire to experience history firsthand. As tourism boomed, Egypt's ancient heritage tragically became a commodity. World fairs and international expositions featured elaborate Egyptian courts that dazzled millions of visitors with scale models and transplanted artifacts. Cemeteries across Europe borrowed pharaonic motifs. City squares sprouted newly dedicated obelisks. Museums in Paris and London entered a fierce, competitive race to stockpile the most impressive collections of antiquities, often overlooking the dubious provenance of the items. This widespread, unchecked fascination came at a steep and undeniable cost. Egypt's heritage was plundered on a massive scale. Tomb ratings skyrocketed, driven by the insatiable European market demand for authentic relics. Perhaps the strangest and most unsettling cultural expression of Victorian Egyptomania was the phenomenon of the mummy unwrapping party. Earlier centuries had already consumed mummies as medicine, believing the ancient material possessed curative properties, or ground them into a pigment called mummy brown. But in the Victorian age, the fascination turned into a bizarre public performance, blurring the lines between scholarship and entertainment. Imagine the scene: a crowded lecture hall, the air thick with smoke and candlelight. At the center of the stage lies a genuine Egyptian mummy. A surgeon or archaeologist steps forward with scissors and scalpels. As each layer of linen is delicately peeled away, the hushed audience leans in, gasps erupting at the sight of golden amulets, protective charms, or the leathery, preserved remains of flesh that hadn't seen daylight in thousands of years. Sometimes these spectacles were presented as serious scientific lectures. Other times, as simply fashionable parlor entertainment. Dinner, drinks, and polite conversation gave way to the ultimate macabre after-dinner show. The public unveiling of a body meant never to be seen again. This trend spread across Europe, from London's medical colleges to grand exhibitions like the Paris Exposition of 1867. The more Egypt was consumed as this sort of sensational entertainment, the easier it became to treat its sacred past not as heritage, but as a pure, exploitable commodity. This frenzy of looting and spectacle inevitably led to the Gothic myth of the mummy's curse, a story that conveniently dramatized Egyptian relics as dangerous and supernatural, skillfully distracting from the very real and immediate horror of colonial plunder and desecration. But all of this spectacle was about to be eclipsed by one single golden discovery that would change everything. The single greatest, most spectacular spark of global Egyptomania flared on November 4th, 1922. The legendary moment occurred when archaeologist Howard Carter, funded by his patron Lord Carnarvon, peered through a tiny hole into the sealed tomb of an obscure pharaoh. When asked what he saw, Carter famously whispered that he saw wonderful things. He had found the virtually intact resting place of the boy king, Tutankhamun, glittering with countless treasures untouched for over 3,000 years. The sheer scale of the gold, jewelry, furniture, and ritual objects found inside was unparalleled in the history of archaeology. The following year, in 1923, Lord Carnarvon's sudden death sparked a frenzy of sensationalized rumors about a supposed mummy's curse, fueling worldwide media fascination with the tomb and creating a myth that persists even today. The worldwide media attention guaranteed that this discovery would be fundamentally different from any before it. The final reveal came in 1924, when Carter finally reached the central sarcophagus and revealed the golden funerary mask of the boy king to the modern world. The Times newspaper had already secured exclusive rights to report on the excavation, and photographer Harry Burton's meticulously staged photographs transformed the discovery into the first truly global media spectacle of the 20th century. The sheer visual opulence of Tutankhamun's gold captured the world's imagination with unbelievable force. After the horrors of World War I, a weary global public craved escapism. Tutankhamun provided it, a vision of a golden, mysterious, and seemingly eternal world revealed just as the modern age was grappling with fragility and change. This cultural tidal wave became known as Tutmania. Fashion immediately embraced Egyptian motifs. Flapper dresses worn by fashionable ladies of the 1920s echoed the geometric patterns of papyrus reliefs. Bobbed hairstyles mirrored the precise lines of ancient queens' headdresses. Art Deco architecture and design borrowed heavily from pharaonic styles, incorporating sunbursts, zigzags, and stylized hieroglyphic elements, permanently marking the style of the Jazz Age. Cleopatra and Isis were reimagined as icons of modern feminine power, sophistication, and glamour. Yet, within Egypt itself, Tutankhamun symbolized something far deeper than mere global glamour. The 1920s were a period of intense and rising nationalism and demand for independence from British control. For Egyptians, the boy king was not just an archaeological marvel. He became a potent symbol of their independence and the unbroken continuity of their civilization. Suddenly, Egyptian schools began teaching pharaonic history. Egyptian Egyptologists took leadership roles, and museums once managed entirely by Europeans increasingly came under Egyptian control. Tutankhamun was officially reclaimed as a national icon, a powerful bridge connecting ancient pride with a modern, independent identity. Ultimately, the long dramatic history of Egyptomania reveals less about ancient Egypt than it does about the societies that fixated on it. For the Romans, it was a mirror of imperial power and cultural assimilation. For Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers, it was a profound stage for mystery and ancient wisdom. For the Victorians, it tragically became both a sensational spectacle and a mere commodity. And in the 20th century, the discovery of Tutankhamun transformed it into a global media phenomenon that also served as a catalyst for political self-determination. The story, fortunately, does not end with cultural appropriation. Tutankhamun's tomb allowed Egypt to decisively reclaim its past, transforming mere global fascination into a source of enduring national pride and political resilience. Egyptomania, then, is not only about the West's long-standing obsessions, it is fundamentally about Egypt's remarkable resilience and its eventual, undeniable ownership of its own profound history. In a real and tangible sense, the allure of Egyptomania never truly ended. From modern Hollywood epics like Cleopatra and The Mummy to the continued overwhelming global demand for Egyptian exhibitions that tour the world, the fascination persists, constantly adapting to the modern era. Ancient Egypt still functions as a powerful mirror for modern desires. Whether for glamour, political power, or simply the thrill of mystery, its legacy remains unmistakable, enduring, and ultimately its own. We hope this animated journey through time has brought history to life and deepened your understanding of this profound cultural phenomenon. Remember, this video is based on the meticulous research of respected historians, and you can find a list of our references shown on screen now. If you enjoyed this captivating look at Egyptomania, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming explorations of world history.